Yo, Mr. Lucas coming to you from home again. Yes, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Oh my gosh, where's his beard? And some of you probably didn't even notice I had a beard. I don't know about you all, but after all of that snow and ice, I figured it was time for my face to shed off its winter coat and get ready for spring. And speaking of some things ending, are you sick and tired of going through all of these constitutional amendments? I've got good news for you. This lesson here is our last lesson where we go over new constitutional amendments. Then we're moving on from the Constitution. So let's get to it. So yes, as you saw, we're taking a look at the suffrage amendments today, but what does that word suffrage mean? And why might it be important to know? Well, to answer what it is and why it's at least important to know what it is, let's just watch this video.
I'm outside of the Department of Feminist Studies here at UCSB, and I'm trying to get people to sign a petition to end women's suffrage. Hey, are you willing to sign the petition?
What?
To end women's suffrage. Just need your print name, signature. Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, we're trying to end it.
Okay.
The suffraging. And you're in favor
Yes,
of that.
I'm in favor of that.
Are you guys willing to sign a petition
For what?
to end women's suffraging?
Suffraging?
The suffrage.
What are we like why are we suffering?
No, suffrage.
Oh,
Okay, I don't
You'll
care.
sign? Okay, cool.
All I gotta do is sign?
Yeah, we're gonna send it to like a congressman, state senator, Jake Gyllenhaal. It's to end women's suffrage.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much. Do you know what suffrage is, right?
Like the inequality and stuff like that of women.
It's the inequality and stuff like that of women.
Well,
It's a terrible thing, so.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really
pretty bad.
It's a bad thing. So.
Yeah.
All right, great. And do you know what suffraging is, right? Or suffrage?
Yeah. Like rights and stuff.
Suffrage is the right to vote.
Oh.
So we're trying to end
Gotcha.
women's right to vote.
What?
Yeah.
What? Oh, wait, I want to take it back.
You can't. You already signed it, Heather.
Oh my god, I'm so dumb.
Yeah.
What is it for?
It's to end women's suffrage.
Okay.
Yeah. Great, thank you. It's a petition to end women's suffrage.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
You can
okay.
even just do your first name, that's fine. Ending women's suffrage. Do you want to sign it?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Do you guys want to?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. It's like a terrible thing what's going on. We're doing a petition to end women's suffrage. Would you be willing to sign it? Like,
Okay.
we're just, we need to get to the congressman to end women's suffrage, and we're trying to end the suffraging.
End the suffrage.
Like this-
Don't begin it.
End it. We're trying to end the suffraging.
You're an idiot.
What about you guys? Will you guys?
I don't find out.
This time?
She will. What is it for?
It's to end women's suffrage. It's pretty important. So.
Wait, to end women's suffrage? End women's suffrage?
Yeah.
Women's suffrage is like the right to vote. And you want to stop that? Sorry, no. End women's...
It's to end women's suffrage.
To end our right to vote?
Yeah. Would you be interested?
Ah, yes, so this dude got 14 women to sign a petition to end their own right to vote. So help me, if I ever see any of you on a video like that, I will disown you as a student. And for those of you going to college someday, yes, there will be plenty of people on campus doing fake petitions just like that to try to get you. There's so many lessons to learn out of that video. First of all, before you sign something, make sure you know what it is you're signing. Don't just do something because it sounds good. And then, of course, know what the term suffrage means. Suffrage means the right to vote. So consider this your fair warning. I've told you what it means. If you're ever on one of those videos, it's on you. And we've actually already been over one of the suffrage amendments, being the 15th Amendment, which gave African American men the right to vote. And as George Yeaman predicted, with the passage of the 13th Amendment,
and what shall follow upon that? Universal enfranchisement? Votes for women?
yes, but it would be a while. Even when Yeaman said that in 1865, there already was kind of a growing women's rights movement in the United States at the time. In fact, one of the first women's rights conventions was held in New York in 1848. So it was actually in the 1910s that... Joke's on her. Little did she know, I was preparing for this. I would like you to tell everyone about the outcome of that battle.
Well, when he has a big machine gun and I only have this little thing with 3 little bullets, I didn't really stand a chance. So it was a good fight. We held off to the last second, just like the Alamo, but at the end of the day, there was no hope.
Okay, so I think as punishment, you should be the one to teach the rest about the 19th Amendment. Since apparently, according to some of my students, you are far more entertaining than I am, and they would prefer that you had taught the lesson a couple weeks ago when you were on here. So, you ready for that?
Yeah. All right, you go that way. I don't need you. Here's what happened. During World War I, the men all went off to fight in other countries, and the women had to step up and work in the factories in order to supply the men with bullets, with guns, with bombs. They were creating all of that stuff here in the country. So then the men came back from fighting overseas, and they were like, hang on, wait a minute. Women were doing more than just working in the household. It was going well for them, and the women were like, duh. And so Congress decided that they were going to actually reward the women for doing all of their work during World War I. And so they said that we're going to pass the 18th and the 19th Amendment. So the 18th Amendment banned alcohol. And that was something that women had been fighting for a really long time. So they said, in order to reward you for your service, we're going to pass the 18th Amendment that you've been fighting for. And in addition to that, we are also going to pass the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote. So what that meant was that voting could no longer be based just off of sex. And so they passed the 18th and the 19th Amendment in order to reward women for their work in World War I. How'd I do?
Well, I guess it's really going to be up to them because you were such a big hit with everyone a couple weeks ago. So I guess we'll see what the reviews say.
Okay.
Well, dear, thank you for dropping your knowledge on us today.
You're welcome. All right, back to my 4th graders I go. Peace out. See you later. Have fun.
And hey, if you guys do poorly on the questions about the 19th Amendment on this week's Google form, I'm going to blame her. So yes, the 19th Amendment was a result of the Progressive Era, which also gave us the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, the 18th Amendment, which banned alcohol, which I think you guys are pretty familiar with from history class, which was later repealed by the 21st Amendment, and of course, the 19th Amendment. And for those of you that may not really remember from history class what the Progressive Movement was, that was a movement from the late 1800s to the early 1900s where people tried to use government to change the fabric of society. And so that's why you see a lot of constitutional amendments kind of make some big changes. Our next suffrage amendment wouldn't hit until the 1960s during the Civil Rights era. As y'all remember from my lesson a few weeks ago, we talked about how a lot of African Americans had their right to vote suppressed by states in the South who would force them to do things like literacy tests. But one of the other ways they would try to prevent African Americans from voting is by using poll taxes, which would literally force them to pay money to the government in order to vote. And oftentimes they couldn't afford to do that, which meant they couldn't vote. So poll taxes were a sneaky way for the state governments to prevent poor whites and poor African Americans from voting because the parties in power knew that those poor folks would probably vote a particular way and they didn't want them to vote that particular way. So just try to find a way to make it too expensive for them to vote. Now, as we know, when the Civil Rights era hit, the federal government was going to put their foot down to that type of crap. And sure enough, Congress did when they proposed and passed the 24th Amendment and 3/4 of the states ratified it, and that 24th Amendment banned poll taxes. All right, cool. Sounds great, right? Oh, but hold up. Wait a second. Yes, there's also controversy with this one today. There's a debate today over whether or not people should be forced to show an ID before they vote. You know, that way you can cut down on people trying to vote twice or maybe even non-citizens trying to vote in our elections, you know, trying to cut down on voter fraud. And there's quite a few states in the United States that have voter ID laws where you have to bring some form of identification before you're allowed to vote. And as you remember from my lesson this past November, remember, on election week, Ohio is one of those states. However, some people point out that it costs money to get a photo ID, and in the states that require strictly a photo ID, that could cost like maybe around 40 or 50 bucks. And if you're forcing people to show an ID before they're allowed to vote, you're also forcing them at some point to pay for that ID. And some argue that that violates the 24th Amendment because it's kind of a hidden poll tax. Others fight back and say, well, hey, no, those voter ID laws are necessary to cut down on voter fraud. So regardless of where you fall on the whole voter ID thing, it is one example of a modern controversy where the 24th Amendment is somewhat relevant. And that leads us to the final constitutional amendment we're going to go over. We've taken a look at suffrage amendments that have expanded the right to vote based off of race, based off of gender, but what about age?
The progression of voting rights in America has reflected the era and transformed the pool of eligible voters. In 1776, the right only extended to white males over the age of 21. 2 centuries and 5 amendments to the Constitution later, voting rights have expanded to allow men and women of all races and ethnicities. The latest enactment, the 26th Amendment, set a national uniform voting age, 18 years old, a feat granted on June 22, 1970, after decades in the making. World War II put the voting age at the front line of the suffrage movement. The government lowered the military draft age to 18, while the legal voting age decided by each state was 21. Then, Vietnam exploded in the early 60s, furthering the youth voting movement. The government responded in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. It allowed 18-year-olds to vote in federal elections, while states still decided their voting age. That all changed in 1970. President Richard Nixon signed an extension to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, lowering the voting age for all elections, federal, state, and local. But a move not universally accepted. Some states challenged it, and they won. Oregon's suit reached the Supreme Court, who ruled Congress had exceeded their constitutional rights. But as history shows us, the ruling only pushed Congress to rewrite the Constitution. By March the following year, both the House and Senate voted in favor of lowering the voting age to 18. The proposal was sent to states for ratification, and after approval from 3/4 the Union, the 26th Amendment became part of the Constitution on July 1, 1971. The fastest amendment to ever be adopted.
And that's the story of the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. For the 26th Amendment, remember, it was a reserved power of the states to decide their election laws and who was allowed to vote. The only way the federal government could change it is if they added an amendment to the Constitution. And in most states at the time, the voting age was 21 years old. There was, of course, just one problem. During the Vietnam War, 18-year-olds were being drafted to go fight and die in Vietnam, and they thought to themselves, wait a second, how is it fair that we're the ones getting drafted to go fight and die over there, and we don't even have a say in the war? You see kind of the same argument today when it comes to people arguing the drinking age should be lowered from 21 to 18. The argument follows that, hey, if at 18 you're old enough for the government to put a gun in your hands, ship you overseas, and trust you with that, then you should also be trusted with being able to have alcohol. Now, before you go thinking all these politicians were just simply being nice by lowering the voting age to 21 to 18, some of them had a major incentive to lower the voting age to 18. Why? Well, 18-year-olds and young people in general overall tend to vote a particular way. No matter what country or time period you look at, the younger generations always tend to be a bit more liberal in their outlook on the world. And so in the United States, our younger generations tend to vote Democrat. Yes, I know many of you watching this are exceptions to that, but those are the statistical trends we see throughout pretty much all of history. So yes, the younger generations tend to vote more progressively or are attracted to new ideas that are going to shake the world up. It should therefore come as no surprise that there's actually quite a few Democrats today that support lowering the voting age from 18 down to 16. Doing so would likely expand the Democrats' voting base and give them an uptick in the number of votes they get come election time. Now, I find it very interesting because every year I poll my students and I ask you guys, hey, do you think we should lower the voting age to 16 so that you all can vote? And most of the time, all of you say no. At first, that really surprised me, but after seeing some of the stuff your generation does, it doesn't really surprise me anymore. But in defense of the whole concept of lowering the voting age to 16, many of you that are 16 do pay taxes, yet you can't vote, which means that's kind of taxation without representation. Yeah, I don't want to cause another revolution or anything, but just pointing it out. So we'll see if the voting age ends up getting lowered to 16 on a nationwide scale. Right now, there already are some cities that have lowered their voting age to 16 for city elections. Just like before the 19th Amendment was ratified, there were quite a few states that actually gave women the right to vote in state elections, like Wyoming in 1869. Usually before the federal government expands suffrage rights, quite a few states already do on their own, which kind of shows the momentum's headed in that direction anyway. And so there you have it. That's the suffrage amendments. Hopefully you saw each of these suffrage amendments extended the right to vote to these different groups. And as these different groups were included in the American political process, they changed the trajectory of the country. The inclusion of these new groups of people with these different perspectives forced our political parties and ultimately our government to include them in their target base, and that ultimately changed their own political ideologies a bit. Speaking of political ideologies and political parties, that's the topic we're going to tackle next week. For this week, same old, same old. You got this Ed puzzle, one other Ed puzzle, and then you have a Google form which is due on Thursday. As always, reach out if you need anything, and have a great week.